What's up everybody, Coop here, back with another Star Citizen video, and today I'm going to be providing some master modes feedback and performance tuning suggestions. Now the performance tuning suggestions will be some really what I would call wish list items. And so I'm going to put them at the end of the video, and the feedback is going to be at the beginning. So without further ado, let's get into this video. Please make sure you like and subscribe for more content, and without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so right off the bat, I do like the separation between navigation mode and standard control mode, or nav mode and SEM mode. I think from a gameplay perspective, it makes a lot of sense. That being said, I do have an issue with how you transition from navigation mode to SEM mode currently in the game. There is a weird forced speed reduction that feels unnatural, and it's very jarring, and I think that it's the worst part of the experience for me so far. I would remove the forced speed reduction that happens when you switch from nav mode to SEM mode and allow the pilot to slow the ship down naturally. Now, I know that the goal is to slow down combat speeds, and I understand that that is the objective. So that being said, here's how I would execute it. If a ship is traveling at 1200 meters per second in nav mode and then the pilot switches over to SEM mode, the ship will begin to naturally decelerate. Your shields and countermeasures will come back online. However, until the pilot reduces the ship speeds to the designated SEM speeds, all of the weapon systems will remain offline. And I think that that will still allow for lower combat speeds, as you will not be able to fight and use your weapons until you have reduced to SEM speeds, and then your accelerations will be limited to whatever those SEM and boost speeds are. So combat still will occur at those slower speeds, and it also provides a nice little skill check, forcing pilots to learn how to manage their speeds correctly in order to transition from navigation mode to SEM mode. Like, you don't want to be blazing fast and then make the switch, because you're just going to shoot past your target. And if you do that, it's a real chance that they may have already slowed down to SEM speeds and switch, and then their guns on, and they can just tear you to pieces as you blow right by them. Skilled pilots will begin to learn how to manage their speeds correctly, know when to slow down, how far to slow down, how far away they need to be from whoever they're trying to engage before they make that switch. And if they're currently in SEM mode, if they're in nav mode and then they switch to SEM mode, but they're already traveling at SEM speeds, then their weapons will be on as soon as they make that switch. And I just feel like that is a more natural way of going about these speed changes. It still achieves the objective of slower combat speeds, but it doesn't make this weird high G deceleration that makes absolutely no sense, if I'm going to be quite frank. Next thing on the list is the speed tuning. I do like the different speeds for the different classes of vehicles. I think right now the base speeds are as follows: interceptors at 240, light fighters at 225, medium at 220, and heavy fighters at 210. I think this works for the 4 ships that we can currently test in AC, but I for one don't think AC is an ideal environment to test master modes from a holistic standpoint, and I hope that they move testing to the tech preview channel as soon as possible, because as a player, I think it would be easier to give feedback in the PU, as it is where the majority of our gameplay takes place, and we'll really be able to gauge how effective these new modes are in the conditions and the environment that we're going to be using them in. AC is really cool to test like combat, but the PU is more than combat, and I do realize that, hey, this was designed for Squadron first, and they do realize that they're going to have to make it for the PU, but I think it's really difficult for me, who I'm trying to look at it from a holistic standpoint, how to provide good feedback for the PU if I can't test it in PU conditions. So that's kind of sort of where I'm at on the speed tuning side of things. I do have some feedback as far as the tuning. I would like to see instead of using a single speed per class, that CIG apply speed ranges. So that way all interceptors could fall between a speed range of like 280 to 320, light fighters between 260 to 300, and medium fighters between 225 and 275, and then heavy fighters somewhere between 200 and 420. That way, when it comes to tuning the individual ships per class, you can better differentiate speeds and rolls for each ship, and then tune accordingly. So for example, like an M50 could have a base speed of 320, whilst the Buck sits at 280 because it's trading speed for firepower. So the M50 is like a speed demon. It's a great interceptor. It can catch up to someone fast, but it's not going to be a great dogfighter. Whereas the Buck is more of that combatant where, you know, depending on how you use it and why you want to use it, if you know you're going to be intercepting like another combat ship or something that's more capable, you probably want to use a Buck instead of an M50, because the Buck is more equipped to fight once it catches the target, as opposed to the M50 that's there more or less to harass. So for performance, I tried to make it a point earlier with my speed tunings that master modes should have base speeds, because I do think that we should be able to achieve higher speeds by upgrading our component class and grade, but there need to be a number of changes to how components are distributed in the shops, and a rebalance of stock components on ships purchased in-game and or on the pledge store. The first change I would make is every ship purchased either in the game or on the pledge store should come with stock D-grade civilian class components. Number 2, all industrial, military, stealth, and competition components should be removed from ship shops and be placed in specialty reputation-based stores. The current shops, which I will refer to as general stores, should be limited to selling only civilian class components. So you would need to go and find either reputation vendors that will sell to you based on your reputation, or find some black market dealer that's going to sell them to you, but they'll probably sell them at like a very high premium. So if you've got the money, the in-game currency to pay for the UEC, then by all means, but there are definitely more affordable options if you go through reputation. Change number 3, each power plant, class, and grade should come with a marginal speed increase, but still be well below navigation nav mode speeds. So with that being said, I have created a chart, and before I show you that chart, I just want to reiterate that this is a really rough visual guide. I took the speeds I listed above and then just applied them to each of the 4 classes that we can test in AC. All right, so I'm gonna give a high level overview of this chart here. Like, all this is hypothetical and it's just here to illustrate a point. I'm not saying that this is what CIG is going to do or what I want them to do. It's just me giving an example of what could happen and how they could go about balancing components in the future. That being said, all of these speed changes are based on in this system, in this setup, are based on the power plant. Like, the power plant is what determines how fast a ship is going to go and what speeds it's designed to achieve. Like, the frame is one thing. Like I said, the ranges can vary between grades and classes based on the ship. So certain ships are designed to achieve higher speeds. So those D grade components are going to give, like the M50 and Buck example, the M50 being an absolute speed demon versus the Buck being more combat oriented. It's trading off that speed for a more offensive loadout, but it's still faster than other ship classes. That being said, the classes are over here in the first column, and then over here I've got the grades. So as you go across, D, C, B, and A, speed modifier. In this column, I'll get into that shortly. And then the SCM and the boost SEM in bold, and then boost speeds in parentheses. So as I stated previously, every ship you buy, whether it's on the pledge store or whether it's in game, it's going to come stock, fresh off the assembly line, with all civilian D grade components. So when you go from D to C, speed ranges for C class or C grade civilian class components is between 290 and 330, up from 280 and 320, or 280 to 320. The way I see it, the way I would balance it is the civilian components are your cheapest, easiest to maintain, most affordable components. It's your starter package, essentially. This is what's available everywhere. This is the easiest ones that you can get. As you move into different classes like competition, military, stealth, industrial, and commercial, all of those are locked now behind reputation vendors. So until you have the appropriate rep, you will not be able to purchase these components. So there's a progression, there's something to work towards in the game as you play. And so like all of this is based on you playing the game and getting better as you play. So competition drives are about, these power plants are about giving you speed and agility at all costs. In this example, it's a plus 200 to the base. So the base being the D, because everything is based on D grade civilian components. So you go up from 280 to 320 to 480 to 520. So it's a big boost, and it should feel like a big boost. Like it, I would like it to feel like I can tell what type of components a person has just on how their ship is performing. That's the ideal goal of the tuning for me, because it would be like, okay, this person has obviously put in enough time, or they've gotten their hands on some really good components here, because they are outperforming me by a huge margin. And so these components, I would say, are going to be expensive and require a lot of maintenance, and maybe less so as you go up. But just like most performance parts, like if you watch Formula One or any type of racing, those between the races, they spend a lot of time in the garage tuning and getting those components ready for the next race. Maybe not to that degree in the game, but it should kind of mimic that type of feel. Like you want to use your competition components at the racetrack, and after the race is over, you take them off and you put on civilian components, because the way that this would be balanced is because, yes, I know that this is a massive speed increase over everything else, and it could become a meta and no one else would want to use anything other than competition components. But the way you would balance this is something that they showed at SitCon, which is this. So this chart here, this power distribution system and the energy balance. What I would do is, this power distribution and the allocation is set in stone. Like this can't change. Like if you have a competition, all competition drives have this type of allocation set up towards it, and it wouldn't be in this instance for weapons and I guess computers is what this is. It would get the primary allocation to I think that this is the engines, and then this is coolers. It could be switched. Forgive me, because I don't really know what these icons are supposed to represent, but I'm saying for this example, this is going to be the engines. So your +5 allocation would go to engines, and then the +4 would go to the coolers, and then everything else would be flat across the board. So you wouldn't get this +5 here to weapon systems. It would be at max a +2. And what that would do is limit your max weapon capacitor if you have energy-based weapons, and the regen rate of said weapons. For ballistics, it would limit the cooldown rate for ballistic weapons would be a lot slower, because the power plant does not allocate coolant to weapons, because that's not a priority for a competition drive. It's going to prioritize getting coolant to your coolers so that it can cool your engines. And so the ballistics would overheat a lot faster, and they would take a lot longer to cool down. So even if you had a full ballistic loadout, you wouldn't be able to put down nearly as much DPS on a target if you were using a competition power plant. with that in mind, that's kind of sort of how the power allocation would be distributed across each of these classes. It would be relevant to whatever the class's specialization is. So industrial would also have a very similar allocation as like, so before I get into industrial, let's go back to military. So military would have a power allocation very similar to what this chart is here, except for I would say that it would be the +5 obviously to weapons, and then a +4 to coolers. And very similarly, industrial would have a very similar power distribution setup, because the weapon systems are what power the lasers for the mining equipment, or the mining heads, the tractor beams, the salvage heads, and any other industrial proponent. And you may want to have an allocation that is a +5 to weapons and a +5 to coolers, because you really want to make sure that you keep these weapon systems cool, because if the mining head is firing, it's generating a lot of heat, and you need to keep that the mining head cool, so it needs a lot of power also to the cooler to get coolant to that mining head. That also in turn, when you're not in mining mode or salvage mode, when you're not doing your industrial function, you do have that bonus of more power to whatever weapon systems that ship has, so it can defend itself pretty well and on par with a lot of the military ships. And that's primarily because it has a massive speed disadvantage. They're going to be very slow, because speed isn't really an advantage in most industrial situations. Like it's not giving you anything in bonus, so that's why the modifier is very low. Like there's no real reason to allocate power to engines for speed, because you want a lot of that power going to your weapon system so that you can actually do your job faster and efficiently. And then as a result, you have more authority to defend yourself with your weapon systems. Now, I have added a commercial class because I think that the commercial class should be for hauling, transportation, data running, and probably exploration at some point. But these are for professions that prioritize getting from point A to point B as fast as possible and as efficiently as possible. So speed is something that they are going to prioritize, of course, but they also want to be fuel efficient. So if you want to go fast over a very long distance, commercial is the way to go. And then I know that there's probably some concern. There will be some concern with piracy. I'm not saying this is a perfect system, but hypothetically, if we had a economic system that made a little bit more sense, your industrial professions wouldn't technically have the value-added commodities. It would actually be with the commercial haulers, which is why they're going to prioritize speed. And I would make it so that the commercial quantum drives have the fastest spool up time, along with competition. Like these are about speed is their weapon primarily, right? For commercial and for competition, their speed is going to be their main focus for power and allocation. And the military, of course, they're going to prioritize performance in regards to weapons and also to defenses like shields. Same thing with industrial. Like, I think that the industrial and commercial allocation would be primarily in the shields. I think that commercial, you could make the argument for like the +5 to engines and also a +4 or +5 to shields. So while they're not going to fight, they'll have enough power to allocate the shields to where they're going to be very tough to disable and to kill, right? Because that's a chase. Like if I were to make an analogy between the military, industrial, and commercial, if the military are more or less the predators and then the industrial and commercial are the prey, the industrial is like a rhino. It's tough, it's very hard to kill, but it can also defend itself. And then the commercial are like gazelle, or like any fast herbivore that uses its speed as its main advantage. And in order to effectively catch one of these commercial haulers or industrial people. For the industrial side, you're going to need to bring firepower if you want to take on one of these industrial ships. And then for the commercial, you definitely want to bring interceptors, because you're not going to catch them. You want to set up an ambush, and you want to be able to have something with enough speed to be able to run these things down and force them into a combat situation. In which case, I feel like, your commercial haulers should have contracts that pay well enough to where they can afford to hire escorts, because they're going to need it more so than the industrial players would in this sense, because the value added commodities are not going to be the raw materials that the industrial professions are gathering. It's going to be the end use products that those products are used to make, which is going to put a lot of pressure on the commercial people. But that's, like I said, I'm getting off onto a tangent that's not even related, but that's sort of kind of like my feedback. That's where my head is with master modes. All in all, I think it's very tough to gauge how effective the system is going to be if we're only testing it from the standpoint of combat within the PU. Like, I totally understand that this was built in Squadron 42 first, and combat was the main focus, and combat is an issue that needs to be addressed as far as speeds go, because in the PU, I think the combat speeds are way too high as is. But I think that in order for us to really provide valuable feedback for the PU, we're going to need to test master modes in the tech preview channel or on the PTU like as soon as possible. And even if it takes like another year or two, I think it'll be worth it. I think that's why the tech preview makes a lot of sense as the next testing ground for master modes. I think it should just live in the tech preview channel for as long as it needs to. And I hope that they release ships in batches. And I truly hope that the first major change that they make is to speed ranges, so that each of these ships have a little bit more distinction within a class, because I would hate for an M50 and a Buck to be the same, to have the same SEM speed, because it just doesn't make any sense. Same with like the Vanguard and the F8 Lightning. The F8 Lightning should be miles faster than the Vanguard, even though they're in the same class. They have different functions. Like the F8 should be more of a ship that punches down, where the Vanguard punches up. It can take a punch, it can take a beating, and because of it, it's going to be a lot slower. But it doesn't need speed because it has firepower. But anyway, that's my spill. That's my feedback. Thank you for watching. If you haven't, please make sure you like the video, subscribe for more content, and let me know in the comment section what you think. Where's your head at in master modes? What kind of feedback or changes would you make? How do you feel about this system? And just overall your thoughts and opinions on everything that I've talked about today. Like I always say, peace, love, blessings, and may the force be with you always.